Well, hello again. I'm Les Miller. Want to make another short, quick video, not too much in the way of fancy, flashy editing, just make a few statements on a topic that I hope you will find interesting and will help you with your faith. This is something I will present basically as a theory. Not so much that I'm absolutely saying that I think it's something we should all believe, because just in case this is something I'm going a little too far outside the box on, I want to be prepared for some humility in these statements I'm about to make. I've come up with a theory, and I hope the Lord is with me, and I hope it is something that will make sense for you. It's about the seven thunders of Revelation 10. Now, this Bible my wife gave me when I got baptized and joined the church in June of 1988, and it was basically the main Bible I used through the 90s and the early part of the new millennium. I've kind of retired it now. I have other Bibles I use when I go to church or when I do my everyday studies, but thought I'd get it out for us today. Revelation 10, as you know, if you studied prophecy, it's a prediction of the great disappointment. The first few verses, we have the angel that is standing and declares the message. And then, like a lot of places in the Bible, in this chiasm format, it begins and ends the same way. The storyline picks back up when John is told to eat the little book. He eats it, becomes sweet in the mouth, but sour in the stomach. And then the verse 11 ends the chapter with, "He said to me, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings." This, of course, is a reference, verse 11, to the rise of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the calling of Ellen White as our prophet. The whole thing predicted the great disappointment. They took in a message which was sweet to them, but then it became bitter. But we have this mystery part here, verses 3 and 4. Crying with a loud voice, it's the angel who's cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roars, and when he cried out, seven thunders uttered their voices. Now when the seven thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, seal up the things which the seven thunders uttered, and do not write them. This is why I'm only going to present this as a theory. We're not told what they said for a reason. And what I think the reason was is because if people knew ahead of time what this was really all about, it would have depressed them. They wouldn't have been able to handle it. Just like the disciples. In Acts chapter 1, we'll go over there quickly. Acts chapter 1, they are asking Jesus if he will restore the kingdom to Israel, rather. Acts chapter 1, verse 6. And his response is that it's not for you to know the times or the seasons. Imagine what it would have been like if Jesus had said, world history is going to continue for 2,000 more years. They would have been so depressed, they wouldn't have even left the room they were staying in, right? You know, they would have just said, why should we bother? God gives us what we can handle in our world right now, in the moment we're in, and in the world around us. And if we'll do our best there, that is something he can use to expand his work in this world. And as it's carried on in every generation, of course, it's expanded further and further. They went to the Roman Empire. Let's get that verse. It's actually verse 8 here. But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me. Look at the order this is in. Jerusalem, all Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. Samaria, of course, when Paul was experienced his vision, and then he took the gospel to the ends of the earth in their time, in their sense, the Roman Empire, right? And then this process has repeated itself in every generation. So, what does this have to do with the seven thunders? Well, my theory, I submit to you, is this. Since this is, in Revelation 10, a prediction of end-time events, in particular, the Great Disappointment, the rise of the Adventist Church, and the influence this would have on world history, the seven thunders aren't one voice. Rather, they're not seven different voices, seven different messages. They are the same message, seven times over, in each generation of the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I know it's approximately 7 generations of time we've had. My father, he gave me a photocopy of this page from a family Bible that's been handed down through my family for a couple of generations now. I don't know how well it'll show up on camera. Maybe I'll see if I can get a picture of it and edit it in here. But the top reference, the parents here, Samuel Miller. He's born Newport, Nova Scotia, 1823. He was alive during the Great Disappointment. The actual family history book, I've got it upstairs, that I looked at, that my grandfather and my great-grandfather did in the year I was born. This man is 7 generations behind from me. I'm in my mid-50s. He was actually born on the boat coming over from the UK to immigrate to Canada. His parents were coming over, born on the boat, and so the legal thing they did was they listed the birth as happening in the port where the boat checked in to the new country. So he's married in 1846 in Truro, Nova Scotia. He dies in Truro in 1910, 7 generations back from myself. I'm not descended from William Miller. No, I'm spiritually descended from William Miller because I believe the message, but I'm literally descended from a man who was alive during the Great Disappointment. Of course, we all are descended from somebody, aren't we? But, again, getting back to this theory, 7 thunders, 7 voices, no. Same voice, 7 times over. What it was to represent was the ever-expanding work of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in each generation. This is why it was a mystery, because they wouldn't be able to handle it if they had heard it in 1844, if they had been told that's what the interpretation was. And it's kind of an optional extra for us. It can help us to see the past in a light that will encourage us, but we've still got to go forward, right? The second coming hasn't happened yet. We've still got more to do, more teaching, more preaching, more sharing, more witnessing, more growth in our own characters as we come to the Lord for the sanctification that He gives us. Think about this quote here from Early Writings, page 40. Okay? Early Writings, page 40. This is Ellen White describing a vision, and she says, I begged of my attending angel to let me remain in that place. I could not bear the thought of coming back to this dark world again. Then the angel said, you must go back, and if you are faithful, you with the 144,000 shall have the privilege of visiting all the worlds and viewing the handiwork of God. Ties in with my video on Bible proof there's life on other planets. But more importantly for today's topic, ties in with the 7 thunders, because notice what the angel said. Did she say you and the 144,000 as if she would be part of it? No. She said you with the 144,000. In other words, the angel knew they were a separate group. It gives me encouragement because it makes me think that we are the last generation, that we can, through God's grace, finish the work in our lifetime. There's also parallels to all this in the fact that on the Day of Atonement ceremony, they had to sprinkle the blood before the veil 7 times. And when Elijah's on Mount Carmel, 3.5 years of no rain, that corresponds to the 1260 days of the Dark Ages. He spent some of this time in the wilderness. The church was in the wilderness, time of the Waldenses. Then he goes to a pagan nation and is served by a lady there who is right with God and just doesn't know him by name. And that's what happened when the Pilgrims landed in America in 1620. Another quote. This is the original version of my book. I was saved in a living room that I self-published in 2005. I've got my new version now that I sell through Teach Services. And I had a quote in the original version that I didn't include in the new version. It's from Jeffrey Paxton's The Shaking of Adventism, which is a tough read, but if you can get a copy, it's a good read. Unfortunately, I didn't quote the page number, and I didn't keep my copy. I did get rid of it. So I can't show you that right now. But this is from his chapter called Off to an Inauspicious Start, 1844 to 1888. It is fascinating to observe how Adventism has reenacted the doctrinal struggles of the church through the ages. The movement has struggled through a period of dry legalism, the Trinitarian and Christological issues, the question of the nature of the atonement, and now it is embroiled in conflict with soteriology. Our church's history has been a miniature repeat of the history of the entire Christian era. Think about that in the light of Acts 1:8. Jerusalem, all Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. Early days of Adventism. Great disappointment happens in the northeastern United States. The Adventist group falls almost apart. 50 people get together in a barn in 1846. The Lord gives them some visions through Ellen White. They start off, but they're not a cohesive, organized group yet. And they basically do a good work, but still within that sphere in their own minds, which was New England. Then, at a certain point, church headquarters moves. They organize. They have their headquarters in Battle Creek. So now their worldview has expanded to basically the entire United States. And they just begin their mission work in the 1870s, 1880s. In fact, another great read, if you can get a copy, Adventism in America. It's a history book of the church. I'll read you, here, I'll show you some of the chapter titles, actually, before I read my quote. The Millerite Movement, 1830 to 1845, Sectarianism and Organization, 1846 to 1864, Years of Expansion, 1865 to 1885, The Perils of Growth, 1886 to 1905, Shaping the Modern Church, 1906 to 1930, The Church Under Stress, 1931 to 1960, Coping with Change, 1961 to 1980. Now I will give you a quote on page 88 from the chapter Years of Expansion. By 1885, many of Europe's inhabitants could read the Adventist message in their own language periodicals issued by the Imprimerie Polyglot, and I probably massacred that. I took French in high school. Don't speak it here in Western Canada, so I lost it. But anyway, Imprimerie Polyglot at Basel, which is in Switzerland. By this time, the converts to Adventism were also given a sense of unity when a continental council was fashioned. Now that early worldview, of course, I don't have the quote, but maybe you know the story. James White's death. Someone proposes putting a statue of a broken axle on his grave, and Ellen White is like, no way, we are not going to do that. That's an indicator that the people of that time were so wrapped up in the way things had been done for the last 30, 40 years with James White as this major central head that they couldn't imagine seeing or doing anything the other way, a different way, really. But his death kind of prepared the church to change its mindset, to be able to expand. In the years after that, they were basically an American church, and then they were beginning, that was their Samaria, to become a world church when they started to send missionaries to Europe. And then now, of course, a decade or two later, Ellen White sent to Australia. Now the church mission work is really expanding all around the world, and here we are today. Remember, the first generation was promised they would see second coming in their lifetime. They didn't, and then Ellen White comes out with a bunch of quotes saying promises are conditional upon obedience. The church failed, so therefore. Now, I remember one time hearing a sermon in my own church, and the guy was really smug, like, oh, what terrible Adventists they were, they failed. And you know what? I'm not the first to say it. I had a pastor, a friend of mine, say it to me. I'm glad that generation failed because it gave time for me to be born, for me to have a chance to accept Jesus as my Savior and go to heaven, right? So we can't look at it this way or that way, right? We can't be merciless to them because we can be in the same position. If we're not faithful, then we won't be with the 144,000. We have to be faithful so we can be with them. Now, you look at world history as well, a lot of the major things that we have in our time that are really big, important things in our world, like the National Geographic Society, the Coca-Cola Company, the invention and creation of modern communications with the telephone. These things all happened around that time, around the late 1880s, right? The world could have ended then. The American government was considering a Sunday law in 1888, but they didn't. And it gave time for us to be born, for us to be able to do our part and have a place in heaven. So that's a good thing. I'm going to say this in another video at another time, but I'm going to use it here to wrap this video up. Daniel 8:14 we always go straight to when we talk about the 2300 days and the great disappointment and the investigative judgment. But one of the most important verses for Adventists should be Daniel 8:13 as well. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain holy one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? Second saint is asking the first saint a question. The answer the first saint gives is 2300 days, verse 14. This is a prophecy as well of the rise of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are the second saint. Not to say that we think we're better than other people, not to use saint like that. Just movement. Second set of believers. First set figures out the date, 1844. That's the 2300 days. Second set of believers rises up out of the disappointment, looks to that date for meaning and purpose, and understands it in a whole new light because God has given that light to them. Now again, all these things are theories. I submit them to you. I ask you to prayerfully consider them. But I certainly will say, what's wrong with hoping they're true? Right? Jesus is coming. Let's do our part.